Weisenbaum, and I want to welcome you to this White Pine Circle presentation on circle theory as the foundation of anatomy and physiology in classical East Asian medicine. The reason I decided to teach this course and put it up on the White Pine Circle is twofold. The first reason is that a lot of the classes that are offered on the White Pine Circle depend on, or at least are helped by, having an understanding of this circle theory. So it's really to help our members take even more advantage of what the White Pine Circle has to offer. And the second reason for offering this course is that it's a foundation for an upcoming course that's beginning in January on treating women through the great turnings of their lives. And we need to sort of have a foundation of anatomy and physiology from a classical East Asian medical perspective in order to understand women's physiology and the way that our medicine can work for women during their whole lives with menstruation and fertility, pregnancy, birth, postpartum, aging. So this course is sort of a foundation, and for people who are taking that course, we offer this so that when we get to women's physiology, it's easy to understand that. Another reason why I'm doing it is because it's just so near and dear to my heart. And I think that this theory that is really the heart of Chinese medicine is beautiful, and it offers an orientation and a perspective to our medicine that just opens me up into a whole relationship with nature and the cosmos. And I think you'll see what I mean as we go along. And I want to start by just inviting everybody to really take your time with this material. This presentation is long, and it goes into a lot of detail about yin-yang theory. Yin-yang theory is where we're beginning this discussion. And from there, we'll bring yin-yang theory into the wuxing 5 phases and into an understanding of the 6 conformations of the Shanghun Zabing. So I want you to really take your time and do this in small pieces and let it sink in and wash over you, and see what you think about it. Okay, so why circles? That's going to be part of our exploration, is why are we talking about circular dynamics or the circle theory of classical East Asian medicine? And we're going to be looking at this today. We're going to kind of get through 1 and 2 here. Just how the Neijing is all about circles. The whole Neijing is all about circles. And we're going to look at that text and see how it relates to circles and why. And from there, we'll look at yin-yang theory and circles and how the yin-yang symbol is a map of the physiology of nature and of our bodies, since our bodies are nature as well. And then we'll move in future classes as part of this series into how yin-yang generate and keep the wuxing, the 5 phases of birth, growth, maturation, decline, and storage going, how it keeps that going, and how the zongfu of the wuxing facilitate this. And then finally, we'll see how are the 3 yin and the 3 yang, in other words, the 6 conformations, how are they different than the wuxing? How are they related to this yin yang theory we're exploring today? And how do they work in order to generate life? So this whole exploration is basically about physiology. And so I found this definition of physiology that I'd like to start with, because this is what we're talking about. So the Latin root physio generally means physical. So physiology deals with just about everything that keeps us alive and working, and other physiology specialties do the same for other animals and for plants. To do anything serious in the field of health, you've obviously got to know how organisms function normally. Physiology used to be considered separately from anatomy, which focuses on the body's structures. However, it's now known that structure and function can't easily be separated in a scientific way. So anatomy and physiology are often spoken of in the same breath. So we have a whole field of physiology, anatomy and physiology that's from a Western perspective. And what we're going to be doing in this series is looking at physiology, how life works, how an organism works from a classical East Asian perspective. So we'll be looking at what is life, what is an organism, and how do organisms form and stay alive. That's what physiology is. We're going to first start with yin yang. So when we were first in school, we learned about yin yang, and here is a picture of a mountain, and we have the yin side of the mountain and the yang side of the mountain. And the character, the left-hand side of the character, is a symbol for a mountain. And so we have that dark side of the mountain and the light side of the mountain. So down below here, we see on the lower left, the traditional character for yin, and to the right of that, we have the modern character for yin. Up above that, we see an older rendition of the right-hand side of the traditional character. And this character is, by itself, is yun. And really what it is referring to, this yin, is clouds steaming up to become rain. So there's that sense of starting from earth and the clouds going up to become rain. Whereas on the right, we see the traditional character yang and a modern character for yang. And then the radical that's to the right of the mountain radical has a picture of the sun on top with rays shining down. So just kind of think about that, you know, these yin clouds going up to become rain and the sun yang shining down onto earth. Then we have here, these two blue lines are the line for yin. It's a broken line, whereas the red one is the yang line. And let's look now at what we learned in school about yin yang, because this is, for a lot of us, this is our starting place. So we have yin as all these three yin lines, the trigram for earth, three yin lines, the trigram for heaven, three yang lines. And what we learned in school about yin and yang is really about the quantity of yin yang. So this red box and the blue box up above that are the same are what we learned was yin yang imbalance, meaning we have the same amount of yin as yang. And then on the left here, we have yang deficiency, which means that the yang is less than the yin. And then we have yin deficiency, where the yin is less than the yang. And we learned that when the yin is deficient, we'll have an apparent excess of yang because there's more yang than yin. And with the yang deficiency, we'll have an apparent excess of yin. So that means that whenever we see fire, that is on a deficient person, we think, oh, it's yin deficiency, such as hot flashes. So that has kind of infiltrated our whole way of thinking about pathology that we'll look at in some new ways through this presentation. Then we also have where the yang is excess or the yin is excess. So this is all probably pretty familiar to you. And they're all about the quality or quantity of yin and yang. But it doesn't talk about the relationship between yin and yang. It doesn't talk about the direction of flow of yin and yang, how they interact with each other, where they even come from. And so here we have our first little yin-yang symbol, and we'll be looking at that in a lot of detail because the yin-yang symbol is actually all about the relationship between yin and yang. And this is vitally important for understanding what's going on in your clinical experience. And here's a quote. I am not sure where this quote came from. I'm sorry, but from an old book, I'm sure, where it says the first blunder of the physician is failing to understand the transmutations of yin and yang. That's the first blunder of the physician. And so we don't want to fail to understand these changes of yin and yang. And I have come over time to believe that this is the first blunder, is not understanding yin and yang. So we're going to go now to starting to talk about where yin yang comes from. Yin yang are the foundation of our physiology. And so we want to start from where they come from. And according to various texts, they come from the nebulous void. The Tao begins by birthing the nebulous void, and the nebulous void births space and time. Space and time birth chi, and chi has boundaries, it has edges, it has form. So we'll be talking a lot about space and time as we go through this. So the Huainanzi is one of the classical texts. And so this is also a translation of part of the Huainanzi by Kiko Matsumoto and Stephen Birch from Hara Diagnosis, Reflections on the Sea. In the beginnings of old, all is yet formless, no up or down, dark and light are a blur, the only image is a whir. Bright gets brighter, dark gets darker, and yin mingles with yang. Then there was the round pattern manifold. What an achievement that was. Around turned the chords on the pivot of heaven. 8 pillars are buttresses, spread out are the 9 fields of heaven with their numerous edges and angles. The heavens mesh with the 12, sun and moon bond, and the asterisms line up. So we're sort of having this image of it being all a blur, formless, and then starting to differentiate into brighter and darker. And then the patterns in numbers, the number 8, the number 9, the number 12, and slowly there's organization in the world from the nebulous void. From Su Wen, chapter 66, when a being comes to life, this is called Hua. When a being reaches maturation, this is called Bian. The unmeasurable yin yang is called Shen. The Shen that is without particular direction in time space is called sacred. Bian Hua in heaven is the great void. In the person, it's the Tao. On earth, it is the coming into being. This coming into being generates the 5 flavors. The Tao generates knowing how. The dark void generates Shen. So through this quote from chapter 66 of the Huangdi Neijing Su Wen, we have this idea of coming into life and also reaching maturation and starting to decline and coming into life. So this Hua and Bian, and that this continuous coming into life and changing is unmeasurable, meaning that it never stops. Like beings are always coming into life and leaving life. And this unmeasurable aspect of it is spirit. Spirit causes this coming into life and declining. And where does it do that? It does that from the great void. And in the person, this is the way of things. This is the way of things. On earth, it's coming into being. And this idea of the Tao generates, one way to translate this is that the Tao generates wisdom. Another way to think about it is that within this pathway of my life is a knowing how that is generated from spirit. There's a knowing how to run my body. There's a knowing how to make the decisions of my life. And so this being that has come into being is still connected always to the yin yang, which is spirit, which is the knowing how. And where does that come from? It comes from the dark void. So in Su Wen chapter 67, heaven hangs the images and earth completes the form. The 7 heavenly bodies move back and forth through the emptiness like the shuttle of a loom. The 5 move beautifully over earth. The earth supports birth and maturation of all types of forms. No, and for me, this 5 moving beautifully over earth, the 5 is birth, growth, maturation, decline, and death. So that just moves beautifully over earth, supporting birth and maturation of all things. And it's doing it through the images that hang down from heaven. And those are reflected by the 7 heavenly bodies, meaning the sun, the moon, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury. So then the emptiness aligns and resonates with the essence chi of heaven. The stirring of the form essence is just like roots that give rise to branches and leaves. So this emptiness from heaven is inside me and it stirs things into form. So this emptiness that's in heaven that I align with is the root of me. And looking up, seeing all the celestial bodies, one observes these images that are hanging down. And although it's far away, it can be known. So we have this idea of the Wu Ji. There's no extreme, there's nothingness, the great void that sort of starts to mingle and become miasmic and just a mixed primordial chaos of light and dark, and they slowly separate and become this Taiji 2. The Taiji 2 is the great mechanisms map, and that's where we get the yin yang symbol. So from nothingness, it divides and creates this number 2, and the number 2 is the yin yang. So we see that within the number 2 here, we also have this number 3, and because there's the circle that these are inside, there is also the oneness that divides into yin yang. But why does this form a circle? You know, why do we go to circles then? Why does that Tai Chi 2, why is it in a circle that's always moving around? You know, what is it that does that? Is that just an image that we create? Or is that real in life, that things are forming into circles? And so I'd like to offer a little theory about why everything is formed into circles, and that these circles are everywhere in the cosmos, on the most macro level to the most micro level. And a theory of like, why does this form into circles? When yin yang start to separate, then a circle forms and movement starts to happen. Why? Is it just because that's what happens? Let's explore that a little bit, and I have a couple of pictures here, tornado and hurricane from above, which are these circular patterns. So from atoms to galaxies, there's circular movement. Circles that interact with circles to form molecules of matter and light. So I'm going to talk briefly about something that's been of interest to me, about why these circles formed. And I started reading about this, and I was just like, oh my God, this is so cool. And so I'm sharing it with you. You can take it as you like. And this is about thermodynamics. And if you know anything about thermodynamics, you might know that the first law of it is that the total amount of energy in an isolated system is constant and unchanging. You know, so I'm going to use the image of a thermos. And, you know, if we have cold water in a thermos and we add hot water, you know, however much energy after we close the lid that's in there, it's not going to get colder. It's not going to get hotter. It's going to be unchanging. The second law of thermodynamics is related to this, that the total amount of entropy in an isolated system must increase with time. So in that thermos, if we have cold water and we have hot water, then over time, it's going to increase in entropy, meaning that it's going to become more and more mixed until it's tepid. The hot and the cold are going to become more and more tepid. And that's the entropy. That's where instead of being polarized to different temperatures, it becomes murky. It's like adding, you know, red and green. It's going to become brown over time in an isolated system. And an isolated system is one that has no matter or energy coming in or going out. So once you close the thermos, that's it. There's no more heat or cold coming into it. And it's going to, over time, move towards entropy. In nature, truly isolated systems are rare, if non-existent, because there's energy flowing all around us. It's radiating outward from stars and planets, and these, including our planet, have cores that generate heat. So isolated systems are systems that they create in laboratories or in thermoses, but in nature, they don't exist because there's constant energy coming in and energy exchanged between systems. So what does this have to do with circles and yin yang? So when there are any kind of gradient, like the hot water and the cold water in the thermos, it increases in entropy over time. And when a gradient becomes large enough, then it's going to create structures in order to resolve the tension of the polarity. It's going to create organized structures in order to resolve the tension of the polarity. So I have a picture of a hurricane here. So with a hurricane, it's created when, in a simple way, when there's cold air and warm water, and that's a polarity. And it's the law of thermodynamics that it wants to become entropy. It wants to resolve that. It wants to become one temperature. And so it will create ordered structures in order to do that as efficiently as possible. And so it creates a spinning cycle. And another image is when you have a drain that's draining, where there's something full up above and it's empty below, and it wants to, come into balance with yin yang, and the water has to flow down. It'll create a swirling motion in order to go down as efficiently as possible. And so when we have a weather pattern like a hurricane or a tornado, it's really that there are these extremes of yang and yin that are attempting to resolve. And so cycling starts to happen. The cycling structure will spontaneously emerge to enable that gradient to dissipate more effectively, because the universe wants to, or tends towards, entropy at the fastest possible rate. And it will actually create organized systems to help it achieve its thermodynamic goal more efficiently. So circular dynamics are these ordered dynamics in order to facilitate resolution or facilitate dissipation of polarized tensions as quickly as possible. So bear with me on this. Nature is an open system, and it must resolve gradients and will organize around the most efficient way to do this, which is to cycle. Nature creates organized structures through which to resolve, such as living organisms infused with cycling processes. So we have ourselves, we're on Earth, and we have the sun out there. It's the most obvious polarity of yang and yin and of thermodynamics. So we have this cold planet and this hot sun, and they're interacting with each other, and that has a tendency to want to resolve. And so organized structures are created for that to resolve. And over time, these structures get more and more complex. So basically, just imagine yourself as a being that is one of these organized structures that is being used in order to resolve this polarity between heaven and earth. Now, the thing about it is that it basically never fully resolves, because it is an open system. The sun and the earth are one of the most amazing examples of an open system. It's not a closed system. And that means that the light that's coming in from heaven, from the sun, is constantly coming in. So we can start to see our bodies as sort of receiving this light from heaven and transforming it and constantly resolving it through living our lives. And yet it's also constantly pouring in. We have our life cycle. And when we get cut off from the open system, our body has lived its full life, and we cut off from that system, what do we turn into but mud again? We become entropy. We enter back into the entropy, and that entropy can then be acted upon again by the light from heaven to create new birth, growth, development, maturation, decline, and storage. So I hope this is making sense to you, and it's also why circles are formed. And on a very gross level, we can see the circles, like water going down a drain, or a hurricane, or a tornado, or even the orbiting of the Earth around the sun, or the turning of the Earth, or the orbiting of the moon around the Earth, or even the orbiting of the Milky Way around other galaxies. They're concentric circles of circles out into the great void, into infinity. So let's just rest with that a minute, just the idea that our bodies, or the bodies of trees, or bodies of all living organisms, are actually created due to and on behalf of heaven's wish to resolve this tension, this polarized tension, and that everything that goes on in our bodies is going on in cycles. And of course, these cycles are related to yin yang. So when gradients become large enough and sufficient free energy becomes available, like from the sun, a cycling structure will spontaneously emerge to enable that gradient to dissipate more effectively. An open system that's far from equilibrium is planet Earth, because it constantly receives energy from light produced by the sun. And the most interesting open systems are the biological systems we call organisms. And this is all from a book called Romance with Reality by Bobby Azarian. I highly recommend it. So we are an open system that must constantly take in life from heaven in order to maintain order in our bodies. And when this stops, we dissipate. So now let's look at circles and the Huangdi Neijing. And I just love this image. This is the yellow emperor in the middle, and he's facing towards the south, which we'll see is very important. And he's looking at the south and experiencing the existence of the four directions around him and the movement of all of the celestial bodies in a circle around him. So before we go on, I mentioned very briefly the idea of time and space, and we need to see the inseparability of time and space. So I have this beautiful quote from David Abrams, who wrote a book called The Spell of the Sensuous, on the circular interconnected nature of time and space. To oral culture, the ceaseless flux that we call time is overwhelmingly cyclical in character. Time in such a world is not inseparable from the circular life of the sun and moon, from the cycling of the seasons and death and rebirth of animals, from the eternal return of the greening earth. Today, it's easy for most of us living amid the ever-changing constructions of literate technological civilization to conceive and even to feel behind all the seasonal recurrences in the sensuous terrain, the inexorable thrust of a linear and irreversible time. To fully engage sensorially with one's earthly surroundings is to find oneself in a world of cycles within cycles within cycles. The overall trajectory of the visible, tangible world, the world disclosed to humankind by our unaided senses, is circular. The circle is a symbol of both earth, space, and time. The changes of sunup and sundown around the horizon during the course of a year delineate the contours of time, time as part of space. So what we're seeing from this quote is that without space, there is no time. That the space, meaning here I am standing on Earth, and I see that the sun rises, it can't rise without there being four directions. So it rises and moves. And so I have time, I have morning, I have midday, I have dusk, and I have nighttime. And that's defined through space. So if we have no space, there is no time. And so I want to sort of have us feel that sense of being on a planet and how time is so related to the space that we're in and on, and the movement of celestial orbs, especially the sun, as it apparently moves around the Earth, is what defines our time. So this inseparability and interconnectedness of time and space. And I know we're kind of going way out there, but bear with me. This, I think, will bear fruit finally in terms of our clinical realities. Okay, so now that we've sort of seen how yin yang comes from the Great One and why it moves into circles, and we've gotten that time and space are inseparable, we're going to go back to the Neijing. And why should we go back to the Neijing? Okay, we're going to go back to the Neijing because it is a text that's basically all about time-space motions and how this works in heaven, on earth, and hence in our bodies. So this cosmology is the study of the patterns and laws of the cosmos. And the laws and patterns, they govern everything always. So by studying these patterns of motion, we can then understand the physical body. You know, and so much of our medicine in modern TCM has left the profound understanding of the Neijing. And we sort of consider it our fundamental text, and yet we read it and it seems just so obscure and difficult to understand. And then we go back and just do what we do, and it's not really connected to this inner classic. So this idea of ne, or inner, that which is inside, although it's hidden and invisible. And these are the laws and organization that govern the mechanism of life. So this inner classic is about these invisible laws that govern everything. You know, and I'll often talk to my students about the invisible realm is where we want to work. You know, that the signs and symptoms and diseases that people have is the visible realm. But what is it that's governing all of that? And that's what the inner classic, the Hongdi Neijing, is all about. And let's just look for a moment at this character, Jing. So on the left is this radical, that's the silk radical. And it's a radical that has anything to do with threads, will have this radical in it. So in Chinese, the radicals will give you an idea of something about what the character is about. Like the flesh radical tells you that it's a part of the body. So this is the thread radical, and up on the top, on the left is the modern simplified version, and on the right is the traditional version of this radical. And then here on the right, there's an ancient expression of the radical, which actually is like the silkworm with the threads coming out of it. So the silkworm actually excretes a liquid and is always moving in a spinning, twisted figure-8 pattern. It's just so beautiful. And it becomes this shimmering silk as it comes in contact with the air. And I just put a list of other characters that have this radical of thread in it in case you want to look these up. Okay, and then the right side of the character has this radical jing, and this refers to water rivers that flow beneath the earth. This is from the Shouwen Jiezi. These water rivers that flow beneath the earth, and it's the water that flows in the dark underworld. In other words, it flows invisibly. So threads together with flowing invisibly in the dark. So some uses of this word jing, it means longitudinal or these vertical lines in terms of longitude and latitude on the planet. So these are the vertical lines of longitude are the jingdu. So axial, relating to or forming or characteristic of an axis, extending in a direction essentially perpendicular to the plane of a cyclical structure. So that's the jingdu. Also, the jing is the warp of a weaving, which are the vertical lines that are often invisible. The patterns that emerge on the horizontal threads are the wei. So the jing is, again, these vertical lines that are underneath, invisible, that give rise to and support the patterning on the top. Jing Tian Wei Di, it means capable of governing the universe. So these vertical threads from heaven and the more horizontal threads of earth, when those are together, it means capable of governing the universe. Kind of cool. So it's thought about as like this warp and weft. Heaven with the warp and earth with the weft. So we can say that Jing, this character, is an information pathway that's coming vertically back and forth from and to heaven. It's invisible, but it's foundation for all that is visible. So let's just read that again. We can say that Jing is an information pathway that's coming vertically back and forth from and to heaven. It's invisible, but it's foundation for all that is visible. So that which is visible is the weft. So the Nei Jing, this inner Jing, is a Jing, and the traditions connected to it are the way, the tapestry. And you know, we have all these ways of looking at Chinese medicine that are all connected to some extent or another to the inner classic. So whether it's Japanese acupuncture, Dr. Tan acupuncture, 5-element, Huang's classical formulas, Feng Shilun's classical formulas, all are connected to this Jing, these threads, this inner Jing, you know, that is coming from heaven. This classic is coming from heaven to us. And then these many traditions of East Asian medicine, plurality of traditions, are all kind of the weft connected to the classic. Some other meanings of the character Jing, besides being a classic, and when we think of classics, we have the Neijing, the Nanjing, the Shennong Bansa Jing, the Tangye Jing, the Dao De Jing, the I Jing, the Mai Jing, the post-classic. So all of these are classics. So they're all they've got these roots that are really from heaven, almost like they're emissaries that brought them here so that we could interpret them and make them real in our lives, generation after generation. Other meanings of the character Jing are, like we said, the warp of a weaving, also the jingluo, the channels and collaterals. So these jing that are in our bodies are these vertical, and if we're standing up, these channels are vertical, except for the horizontal channel of the dye vessel. They're all vertical and really like information pathways that give rise to the visible. The channels themselves are invisible, but they give rise to our bodies, which are visible. Then we have the Liujing, the 6 channels or the 6 conformations. And here, Jingfang is the classic formulas. To be upright with this invisible connection is to be authentic and honorable. The Jingdu is the longitude. And then interestingly, we have the Yue Jing, which is the monthly Jing, which is menstruation. And so from the point of view of this character Jing, menstruation is everything that goes on in the whole month. All of the development of the endometrium and the development of the egg and ovulation and the breaking down of the endometrium, all due to the fluctuations of the hormones that manifests as a bleed. So the bleed is just the outer manifestation of this monthly invisible flow that's going on. And to me, it's also why when somebody is on the birth control pill that's mimicking pregnancy, and then the hormones are stopped and the woman will then bleed, that's not a menstruation because it's just a bleed, but the invisible Jing was not there for that. So it just gives you an idea. So I want to get a sense of what this classic is. So this inner classic of this information that's coming from heaven that gives rise to the way that we practice our medicine. So we have these classics. The Shenong Bansao Jing is about the herbs that we use. There's this mythical book called the Tangye Jing that's non-existent, and it's rarely talked about, but mentioned a couple times, so it's very mythical, that is about supposedly about herbal formulas, but it doesn't exist, so we don't know. There's the I Ching and the Nei Ching, which are about the principles of medicine. The Nanjing is about the method to use with acupuncture. There's some of that method in the Huangdi Neijing, especially in the Ling Shu, but then the Nanjing really fills that out. And then we have the treatise, the Shanghan Zabing Lun, which is the Shanghan Lun and the Jingui Yao Lui. And that really talks about the method of using herbs and formulas. The method, using the classical principles, the herbs, what's the method to apply that? And from the point of view of this series of talks, we're really thinking about the Shanghan Zabing Lun as intimately connected to the classical principles of the Huangdi Neijing. So in the Huangdi Neijing, it's all circles, and it's about the relationship of time and space. And this relationship is circular, where sunrise defines morning and east, the sun zenith defines midday and south, sunset defines evening and the west, and the sun below defines north and at night. Time and space delineations are inseparable. And in chapter 1, it says, true humans were able to achieve longevity by resonating with heaven and earth. In chapter 2, it describes the nature of the seasons, beginning as usual with spring and moving circularly through each season. It tells us that when we follow the time, space, the Tao, our bodies have no strange diseases. So the most obvious movement of circular movement is the sun around the earth. And so, quoting from the Neijing, spring, dawn, and summer midday are young because they go up and out, birthing and growing the yin of the myriad beings. All beings become moist, warm, and full of vitality and movement. So that's the movement of spring and dawn. We have yang within yin to grow all of these yin myriad beings. And actually, that's not a quote. That's just something I wrote based on the Neijing. The Neijing instructs us to face south. And when we face south, the sun rises on our left, which is why this side of the movement is on the left. Autumn, evening, and winter night are yin because they take yang into storage. All beings become dry, cold, and still. So now that yang is within the yin, and the yin is strong and takes it down, and the yang goes into storage. So we see that the west and nighttime are not when the yang goes away, it's when the yang goes into storage. So you have yang going up inside the yin, and yin going down with the yang inside. And this is really the movement of yin-yang. Right? Yang going up and yang going down and transforming yin as that happens. So this is the movement of day and night. It's the movement of the 4 seasons. And it's also the movement in our bodies. This is the movement that happens inside of our bodies in smaller examples and larger examples. So let's continue to look at the Neijing Suwen and how it is innately always talking about the circular dynamics of time-space. So we'll just start from where the Neijing starts. In former times, there was Huang Di. When he was born, he had magic power like a spirit. When he was a baby, he could speak. When he was still young, his apprehension was quick. After he had grown, he was sincere and skillful. After he had matured, he ascended to heaven. So it sort of sets it up like this is coming from someplace that's kind of superhuman. And now he asks the heavenly teacher, Qi Bo, I have heard that people from long ago, through the passings of springs and autumns, all exceeded 100 years of age. Their movements and activity did not wane. So we get this idea that long ago was long before 475 BCE. So even at the time that this was probably written, he's saying long ago, people used to live for so long, and oh, now what's happening? And also we see the passing of springs and autumns, that this is movement through time is expressed by the seasons. Spring is wood and upward, autumn is metal and downward, through these like risings and fallings of time through space. And Chibo, and he says, as for people of today, after just 1/2 of 100 years, all of them have weakened movements and activities. Is this because the times are different, or is it that people have lost this ability? And Chibo responds, the people of high antiquity were those who knew the Tao. They knew about this way, this path, and they adhered to yin-yang and harmonized themselves with the skill of numbers. Another way to think about this idea of numbers, and here right away we see yin-yang is brought in, but this harmonizing with the skill of numbers is also the repetition of numbers, these cycles of numbers. So if the rules of yin-yang are key, we should know about those rules, right? Here it is, right in the first chapter of our classic text. You know, what did they do? They adhered to yin yang. So what are those rules? And what does it mean to harmonize ourselves? And so this word harmonize, it means to synchronize with, to get right with it, you know, when two things are polarized, this is when they come together. And what is this skill with numbers? And so the numbers are these repetitive movements through time that repeats itself over and over again. So skill with these repeated patterns of day and night and monthly cycles and seasonal cycles. Their eating and drinking were regulated with time. These Jia, this character Jia is these nodes or astronomical nodes or seasonal festivals, but there was this timing to things, and their eating and drinking were regulated with that. Their rising and resting were regular. They didn't tax themselves with meaningless work. And this idea of Chang, this rising and resting were regular. It was ordinary, normal, invariable. I get up, I go to sleep, not chaotic. Hence, they were able to keep their form integrated with their Shen and then live out the time allotted by heaven. Their lifespan exceeded 100 years before they departed. It is not the way with people of today. They drink alcohol as if it were an ordinary beverage and act rashly as if it were normal behavior. They drunkenly enter the bedchamber and exhaust their essence through lust. They squander that which is genuine. So form and Shen are this yin-yang pair. And so they were able to keep the yin-yang integrated, the spirit coming from heaven with the form of their body. And this is part of these rules of yin and yang. And again, living out one's allotted time, we have this bringing in of time again. They do not know how to hold on to fullness, driving their spirit when it is not the right time. They strive for joy, yet go against that which generates happiness. You know, so there's this sense of going against what is correct. And so even, you know, entering the bedchamber too much, you know, is like you think that's going to bring you joy, but you're striving for it and you don't really know what is going to bring you this deeper kind of happiness. So you're actually, by pushing into desires, you're actually going against time. You're going against this alignment with heaven that brings you the deepest satisfaction. Their rising and resting are not at regular times. Hence, they're half of 100 years and they weaken. They don't know how to go as slow as time, making things happen that are not ready to happen. And it's going against, which is the opposite of going with. What does going with time or being right with time mean? In the Neijing Ling Shu chapter 9, it talks about this pingren, this balanced person. It refers to a person with no illness. The Mai, Ko, and Renying, which are the pulses of the neck and on the wrist, of one with no illness, resonates with the 4 seasons and the 4 times. So again, the seasons and time. Above and below respond to each other, coming and going together. So heaven and earth are resonating with each other. That xiangying, the above and below xiangying, are resonating with each other. So when you're between heaven and earth as this organism that's there to help heaven and earth connect, and you're right with that, there's a kind of responsiveness with that coming and going. And that's what it is to be this peaceful, calm, balanced person with no illness. The vessels of the six Jing, so we have these invisible vertical channels, they move without restriction. And it's really those Jing that connect us, those channels that connect us between heaven and earth. The root and branch of cold and warmth guard and govern each other. And so the form, flesh, blood, and qi are appropriate in relation to each other. This is the Pingren. Moving and guarding the cold and the warmth. And this is something we'll talk about later in our physiology. What is the root and branch of cold and warmth? So here we have heaven above and earth below. And I want to point out that this earth below is the character D. We have 10 D. And this character is the character used for earth when we're talking about heaven and earth, whereas the character when we're using, when we're talking about the Wuxing and the earth phase, that character is different. It's 2. And so when we get to talking about the Wuxing, we're going to be translating that 2 as soil. So here we have heaven and earth, 10 D, and these great sweeping motions of yang and yin. And here's from Su Wen 5. As for yin yang, they are the pathways, the Tao, the way of heaven and earth, the organizing web, the guiding principles, or the guide ropes and connecting threads of the myriad beings, the mother and father of change and transformation, the beginning and end of birth and death, and the residence of spirit illumination. And then it says, to treat disease, one must seek this root. To treat disease, we have to understand this root that is yin yang. It is yin yang. That's the root. As for yin yang, so it's referring back to that. We must seek it in this root. So we have this movement between heaven and earth, this polarity that sort of wants to resolve, and the yang is coming down from heaven to earth and creating this organized structure that's me, and that organized structure is resolving it, and it's expressed back out again, coming down on the right and expressed back out again on the left. And that process is constant, coming in and being expressed back out. It never stops. If I stopped receiving the influences from heaven, it would express until it dissipated. And that would be called being dead. So let's go through some of that passage from the 5th chapter of the Su Wen and look at this character Tao, like the Tao Te Ching. And the emperor said, yin and yang, they are the Tao of heaven and earth. But this idea of Tao, it's, we think of it as the way, but it's also a path, and paths go from someplace to someplace else, and something travels on them. So we also want to think about it as this path, this pathway. Yin yang are the pathway of heaven and earth. And here from Liu Lihong, he says, the Yellow Emperor refers to yin yang as the warp and the weft, literally the systematic arrangement of a lead rope and the net that it is holding together. Yin yang hold the pattern of the myriad things. So again, we have these threads that are coming down, these guide ropes and connecting threads that are coming down, going back and forth between heaven and earth. And I am the weft, this organized structure of that's created through that invisible communication between heaven and earth along these pathways. Then we have this idea of the father and mother of all bianhua, all changes and transformations, the foundation and beginning of giving birth and taking life. And then Liu Lihong also says in his book, The Classical Chinese Medicine, when we investigate phenomena, we undoubtedly investigate the way in which they change through time and space. And what guides these changes? Yin Yang. We come in contact with human society or the natural world, regardless of whether we're talking about something from the human or the natural world, plant or animal, organic or inorganic, the universe or the Milky Way. Its entire process is no doubt a process in which it emerges into existence, and then passes out of existence. It changes, it's born and then dies. How is this process brought into being? By yin yang. And then that same quote from Su Wen 5 says, the palace of the Shenming, the Shenming Zhifuya. So this Fu is like the official residence or home. It's also like the seat of government. So it's this palace of the spirit brightness and the Shenming. And here is from Sabina Wilms from her book, Humming with Elephants, where she writes, looking at the etymology of the character Shen is a compound of the radical Shur, which is an altar or any place where sacrifices are offered to the ancestors, and the phonetic Shen, which are two hands stretched upward. The whole character thus has the connotation of stretching and reaching upward in an effort to establish sacred connection, which results in the bestowal of blessings. To grasp the full meaning of Ming in the compound Shen Ming, we might have to suspend our need in English language to decide between emitting light and receiving light, and therefore leave the term untranslated. But it has both the idea of receiving light and emitting light. And so we are this palace of the Shenming. And so here I just put a picture of how the spirit light emanates from us. When we receive it, it just emanates from us naturally. You know, the previous image is very New Age, and I think it's very, it sort of gives the sense of receiving light and emitting it, but in a way that is also very ordinary. And just, I love this picture, like the warmth and light that is emanating from this little person. Okay, so physiology as communication with heaven, and this is from Su Wen, chapter 3. Ever since antiquity, opening through and communicating with heaven has been the foundation of life. It just says it, doesn't it? That's foundation for life, opening through and communicating with heaven. This is rooted in yin yang and is the space between heaven and earth with the six joinings. The six joinings are the Liu He, are the center, the four directions up and down. So being in the center of these six directions. This qi of the 9 divisions and 9 orifices, 5 zong organs, 12 sections, all open through to and communicate with heaven's qi. This process of connection generates the 5, and its qi is 3. If one repeatedly violates these numbers, this leads to evil qi and damage to the person. This is the root of long life. So violating these numbers means not being aligned to open through and communicate, so that these 9 divisions and orifices and zong and 12 sections open up. Regarding the qi of heavens above, when it is pure and still, the will and intention are well ordered. Alignment with this makes the yang qi secure. Though there are thief evils, they will be unable to cause harm. This is due to being in accord with the progression of the seasons. And seasons, another word for seasons is time. So the progression of time. Therefore, the sage transmits her Jingshen, her spirit essence, and takes the medicine of heaven's qi, and thereby communicates openly with spirit illumination. Without this, there will be inner blockage of the 9 orifices, obstruction of the outer muscles and flesh, scattered protective qi, and this is called spontaneous damage exploiting the qi. How could it be more clear, huh? And then Liu Lihong says, again from his classical Chinese medicine, for the authors of the Huangdi Neijing and for Chinese medicine practitioners of any age, the unifying theory to explain all phenomena is yin-yang theory. So we'll talk about the right relationship of yin and yang. If students' heart, this is from Zhang Qinan. Zhang Qinan is the founder of the Fire God School. And he writes, if students are able to pursue the ultimate principle by comprehending yin and yang, they have the foundation necessary to enter through Zhang Zhongjing's door. So basically he's saying, if you don't understand yin yang, you cannot enter Zhang Zhongjing's door. Then Liu Lihong goes along with this. In accordance with this advice, we must first explore yin and yang in order to prepare ourselves adequately for studying the Shanghanlun. So that's what we're doing right now, is we are exploring yin yang to prepare ourselves adequately to study the Shanghanlun. And a lot of the courses that are coming up, a lot of the courses in the White Pine Circle are about the Shanghanlun. And without really understanding yin yang, then we can't really understand the Shanghanlun. So we have this heaven and earth, and let's just think about the connection between heaven and earth as these great sweeping motions of yang and yin. And heaven comes down to the yin in the form of yang, interacts with the yin, steams it back up again in the form of a person that receives even more heavenly influences. And these motions between heaven and earth through an organism, through a living being, through me, are constantly moving through, constantly going. So the qi of heaven and earth is the qi of the 2 sides, yin, yang. This is the qi of the yin yang aspects of the myriad things of the cosmos. They're combined, and this is the joining movement of yin yang. This is from the illustrated Shanghanlun Yin and Yang by Yi Zhibiao. So I think this is a good place to end this first presentation. And when we come back, we're going to talk about yin yang in relation to pre-heaven and post-heaven and go from there. So thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.